Hello, everyone. This is Sirisha, and I host the Women, Career, and Life podcast. Just like you, I've traversed varied paths, stumbled a little, picked myself up, and learned a great deal on my journey. Many of us face similar questions, but we don't always get to have a conversation with our friends or peers. In this podcast, you will hear real stories that you can connect with on the challenges of navigating career and life. You must be wondering who I am. In my everyday life, I'm a career woman, a mom, and an avid reader. I'm also a road tripper, amateur gardener, and even a fashionista on some days. Join me and my guests as we have an open and honest discussion on career change, trade-offs, and working across boundaries. You get the idea. It's a perspective you simply may not hear anywhere else.
Today's conversation with Lenetra King, who is the CEO of Watch Me Excel, an executive coach and a healthcare exec over 15 years experience, is about how to have executive presence while still being your authentic self. What can you do to have a sponsor? And the distinction between mentors, advocates, and sponsors. I'm really excited to have Lenetra King, who is joining us today. She's actually very busy because she's just getting her book published on February 1st. She is the CEO of Watch Me Excel and has a lot of executive experience in the healthcare industry for the last 15 years as a CEO and VP. She works with executives and senior leaders on executive coaching and getting them to the C-suite. Lenetra, thank you for being here. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
So let's get started. I know when we were chatting, we were talking about executive presence. I usually ask people where they come from and what they built up, but let's really start with your book, where you are today, and we can weave your backstory in as we go through the conversation.
So I'm so excited about my book. I've got a copy right here, of course. Would love to be able to show it to you. So my book is called Unwritten Insights, a career playbook for leaders of color. And I'm so super excited about this work because it's really a combination of so many different things that I learned throughout my career journey. You talked a little bit about me being in the healthcare industry. So my entire career was spent in healthcare. And the last 15 of those years, I was in senior executive roles in hospitals around the country. So I joke with people, 4 different hospitals, 4 different states. And I started when I was 5. But it was really, this book is a combination of not only some of the things that I experienced and observed, but I also did a lot of research around some of the leadership competencies and capabilities that it takes for one to be successful working in corporate America. And I did some interviews with leaders of color in a variety of different industries. So I'm so super excited about it. It comes out February 1st. You can pre-order now. So it's on Amazon, and I'm just super excited to be able to share some of these things with other leaders, professionals of color, even allies in the workplace, to be able to help people amplify their capabilities, show up, and have career and leadership success.
Very important. I'm glad you called out allies because it's not just for people who are in the space, but for others to be able to support them. So give me some key lessons like that people would take away, not only to be allies, but people of color who I'm part of as well, on how to the executive presence or to really grow and advance in their career.
Executive presence is one of those things that's interesting because I feel like it is so very subjective. Everybody has a different idea or a different definition of what executive presence actually is. So one of the things that I like to do is start out with a definition of what is executive presence. And one of my favorite authors, her name is Sylvia Ann Hewlett, actually talks about this topic of executive presence. And she defines it as a dynamic mix of 3 elements. And those 3 elements are how you look, how you act, and really how you show up. And I would add to that, in addition to those 3 things, it's your confidence, it's your charisma, it's your ability to be able to show up, looking the part, being ready to play the game, but it's also how other people perceive you. It's a part of your leadership brand, your personal brand. And I spend so much time talking to people about this topic of executive presence because I feel like as a woman of color, we're judged much more harshly around executive presence. And when we have missteps, And I just think it's such an important element to talk about, especially if you're in that corporate arena or regardless of where you are. If you're looking to be able to elevate your career, your leadership career, get into a leadership role or get into an executive role, you have to have that presence. People have to perceive that you are someone who is looking the part, ready to play that game, and that you can do it. And they're basing that off of how you show up, your confidence, your charisma, how you're driving results, how you're acting, how you're engaging with other people. So as I think about executive presence, those are all of the characteristics that I would like for people to really think about with their own presence.
You brought up something that, especially since your book is also written to people of color, how you show up, how you look, how you dress, how you sound. There is no one way to do that. It's very nuanced, and everything research shows, right? The workplace culture is very monochromatic. And that's the struggle with trying to, when they talk about DEI, it's not just about that. It was never built for color in all its glory. And how do you show up? It's this tussle I struggle with. And I think a lot of people do, is being your authentic self and still showing up as professional and still being heard and seen with your own insights and inputs. And how do you navigate that sort of narrow space? It is quite narrow. And how do you widen that space?
I'm glad you asked this question. And it's something that I personally struggled with, even in my own career, because on one hand, I want to be able to express myself authentically and show up in a way that's comfortable for me. However, in so many environments, people struggle with that. I struggled with that because I wanted to have the look, be able to subscribe to that look, and still have people think that this is a person who has leadership or executive potential. And I feel like in some environments, when you go outside of that box, then perhaps you're no longer on the list of someone who can be considered for a leadership role. So what I would say to people is have the courage to be who you are and show up authentically, regardless of how you express yourself. But you have to know your organization's culture. You have to know your leadership. You have to know what those rules are. And if you desire to step outside of that box, I think you have to be aware of those consequences and those ramifications, if there are consequences and ramifications. But I think about some of the conversations that I had, even when I was interviewing executives for the book. And one of them is about our hair. Women of color and our hair, the way that we choose to wear our hair. I'm sure you're aware of the Crown Act and all of the work that's gone into the Crown Act around ensuring that women from ethnic backgrounds aren't discriminated against in the workplace based off of how they wear their hair. And I was having some very interesting conversations with people who decide, and just today I'm wearing braids, who decide to wear braids or decide to wear ethnic attire in the workplace. And what I would say is have the courage to do that, because we shouldn't have to de-ethnicize ourselves in order to appear more professional. And that doesn't take away from our professionalism. And I would be so glad when we get to the point in many environments and organizations where this isn't a conversation. How we wear our hair or how we decide to show up or not show up should not detract from our ability to go into an organization, build trust, build teams, drive results, and have a demonstrated track record of success. But does that happen? Absolutely, it happens. And what I would say to that is you just have to be aware of your environment, be aware of your culture, but I think you also have to be brave enough to show up as your authentic self. And I'm so glad that there are a number of organizations around the country, around the world, who are having these conversations about DE&I, but also belonging and helping their employees to be their most authentic selves, helping their leaders to be their most authentic selves, regardless of how you decide to wear your hair. So that's just something that I would throw out there.
You said it so well. It's spot on, because there's a couple of things that struck me. This is important for everyone who's listening. You have to start almost from day one. What research has shown that is when senior leaders, when they're growing and they decide, I'm going to in the beginning, and then I'm going to show up as my authentic self when I hit, say, the senior level or the C-suite level. they actually find it quite a bit more challenging to do that because they're more confined. So you almost have to start right from the beginning on how you want to stay the course rather than try to pivot suddenly in the middle of it. And the other thing is, when you're talking about bringing yourself, so I'm originally from India. For certain festivals, like for Diwali at work, a bunch of us, we wear our ethnic attire, we take sweets, we actually celebrate in this big meeting in the room.
Yes.
And over the years, it's become such that our colleagues know we celebrated. So they have also joined us in wearing the clothes and taking pictures with us. So it's an opportunity for us to educate people, right? You cannot expect someone else to understand it because they've never seen it. In all fairness, it behooves you to own it as much, to educate them, to show them a different aspect other than what they see on TV, which is a very small, curated, singular perspective on things. So we could invite them, go out, maybe they come home, but so many places. So it's become a opportunity to talk about it, to get dressed, to invite them. A lot of corporations have employee resource groups or business resource groups. So instead of you just attending for your own resource group, take your colleagues with you, take some friends with you. They get to try the food. You could even do lunches where each of you try different cuisines. Those are things I've tried and it really works out. And in one instance during COVID, in our group, what we did is we shared about our background, where we were visiting and food and locations, because that gave a different perspective for people to understand. Because no matter what programs, they're never going to cover it other than someone's lived experience. So a way to really showcase that is a great way to get integrated and belong, as you said.
And I think that's so true. And I love to hear that you work in an organization where they do have those affinity groups or business resource groups or employee resource groups. They go by so many different names, but I think those are perfect opportunities for organizations to really curate a culture where people feel like they can show up and they belong, because so many people struggle with that, regardless of whether you're from India, whether you're from the continent of Africa, whether you were born right here in this country. But if you are considered whatever different is for that environment, there are some people who struggle with that. And kudos to the organizations who are really stepping out there and doing everything that they can to help their employees feel like they belong. Because as I say, it's one thing for you to have a more diverse culture, for you to have an inclusive culture, but you have to take that next step and really help your leaders and help your employees feel like that's a place where they belong. And when you're having those cultures where you're celebrating various cultures and various ethnicities and various backgrounds, those are some tremendous steps that organizations can take to truly help people feel like they belong and that they can show up authentically. Because when we show up authentically and we're able to express ourselves, then we're much happier, we're much more engaged, we're much more productive, and we can do all the things that our organizations want us to do.
Absolutely. There's the organization and the culture, but I think we own it as much ourselves. So each of us can take that step to bring people together and celebrate together the differences and the things that are common amongst us to move forward.
Absolutely right. I think you said it perfectly. It's two sides to that. It's what is the responsibility of organizations and senior leaders in those organizations? And then what is our responsibility? So I think if both sides are doing their parts, then we'll go so much further in terms of all of these conversations and really having strong, focused environments where people are in diverse, inclusive environments where they feel like they belong.
So when you talk about executive presence, we cannot forget the importance of having mentors and sponsors and advocates. So what do you do to bring those people? Like, I've had a lot of conversations around mentorship in the podcast, but not a lot around advocacy and sponsorship. So how do people find the individuals who are going to support them? And sometimes, most often, I think you don't have visibility to who is supporting you. So how do you build that relationship?
If you want to have your senior leaders or someone who's a couple of levels above you to take an interest in you, then I would say there's a few things that, you should do in terms of that checklist. The first one is really focusing on articulating what your value add is to the organization. So it's understanding the organization's strategic priorities. It's understanding what your boss's priorities are, what's on your leader's plate, and what helps that person to drive results for the organization. And as you come into the equation, your ability to be able to articulate here's my value add, here's how I'm driving results, here's how I'm helping the organization be successful is important. I think the other part of that is being aware of your brand and knowing what differentiates you from everyone else, and starting with your personal brands, your leadership brands. And that is how people are going to know who you are. It's how you're able to differentiate yourself in the workplace, but it's also how you show up. It's how you drive results. It's how you do all of the things that you have to do. And then I would say it's about networking, and it's about cultivating those relationships with people at multiple levels of the organization, and not just getting the people who have the titles. The people who have the titles are very important. So you want to focus in what I would call those big three buckets: curating a relationship with your boss, your peers, and your colleagues throughout the organization, and then your direct reports if you are a people leader, and other stakeholders who are in the organization, and just investing that time and that energy in building true, solid relationships with people across the organization. So as you think about articulating your value add, as you think about your brand, as you think about cultivating your network, it's also demonstrating potential. Right? It's demonstrating that potential that you are ready to go to that next level. And so as you're intentionally focusing on all of those things, what's your plan? What's your strategy to be able to do that and going after it? And I think if you think about it in those ways, and you may not have picked up on this, but I had it in ABCD format so that as I'm sharing with other people, I can keep that straight for myself. But I kind of share things in that ABC or ABCD format, just as a strategy for people who want to get noticed by their senior leaders, or who want to get noticed by their senior managers in the organization. And I would always say that if you want to get noticed, it is about doing a good job in the job that you're in today, and really focusing there, but also focusing on some of those other key characteristics about the organization, and focusing on the right things for the organization, having those relationships, and just doing all the things that you have to get noticed.
In some sense, trying to figure out how to get sponsorship, you're actually providing insight for them to understand what you bring to the table, what your contribution is, how you can help them address some of the key points for the organization and move forward. Because sponsors are people who are going to talk about you when you're not in the room, and you need to be able to have them everywhere. And what I've realized over time, and I think this is from my own experience in conversations with a lot of people, is often they're going to be the people you don't expect necessarily to be speaking on your behalf. And I found that to be the case when I've had a career break and I came back. The person who was advocating and asking me to come back was, I had a very brief interaction with them like a few years before. So you never know who those people who are going to be talking about you. And sponsored in some ways doesn't have to be this one person, right? It's a network. Like you said, peers, colleagues. It's like this web network of everybody who's going to have a conversation at a different, could be about a project. It could be about the team leadership. It could be about a new role. Maybe even attending a conference outside that gives you insight. So it's about being true to bringing value, not about just checking a box saying, okay, I made this connection, or this title, but really about providing value for them and for yourself as well.
Absolutely. Not just checking the box. I think you have to do the things, but you have to do more than just check the box. And I would even say, in terms of this conversation around sponsorship, to me, as I think about mentors, sponsors, and advocates, I think that they are very distinct and different. So as I think about a sponsor and what a sponsor is and how the sponsor can open that door for you, in my eyes, it's always going to be a person who has influence in the organization. They are a decision maker at the table in terms of being able to talk about responsibilities, high visibility projects, promotions, but also compensation. Because having a sponsor who can have a conversation about promotions and compensation are very important. And typically that's not going to be a person who's a junior level or who is at the junior level in the organization. So sponsors, to me, have to be someone who is high enough and influential enough in the organization to be able to call your name out in a room full of opportunities. They have to be someone who is willing to risk their relationship and their own political capital on you, right, as junior talent. And then as I think about someone who is an advocate, is someone who can be anyone in the organization. You've worked on a project. It could be the project manager, project director, pick a title, but it's someone who, regardless of where they are in the organization, they can be an advocate for you. If you're someone who, again, has that demonstrated track record of success, you want multiple people in the organization who say, hey, I've been on a project with this person and she's amazing. She always gets it done. She always drives success. She's a great communicator. She shows up with executive presence. And where those competencies are, that someone can speak about you, that to me is an advocate. And then a mentor really is someone who, regardless again of where they are in the organization, there's someone who can give you advice or guidance or any type of support, whether it's a project, your career strategy, workplace conflict, it's some of those things. So I think making that distinction between mentors, advocates, and sponsors are very important. And I do think, especially because we're talking about women and we're talking about women in their careers, women tend to be over mentored and under sponsored. And there's research that's out there that talks about how when women go and they search for mentors and they search for various people to help support their careers, women and organizations should be doing more to actually sponsor women and not just mentor them. Because when women are sponsored, when people of color are sponsored, their engagement tends to be higher, their retention with the organization tends to be higher, and there's so many more doors that are open to them.
Don't forget to subscribe to my Substack newsletter. The links are in the show notes. If you're looking to partner with me for keynote speaking on women leadership, financial independence, or graduate school and beyond, check out my website and reach out to me. Stay tuned in and listen to the rest of the podcast. Thanks for listening.
You're absolutely right about a lot of organizations have mentoring programs. Don't say that you have to have a sponsorship program as such, because it's a bit hard to make it like an official program, but it has to be something that the HR and the executive teams are looking at on who to be promoting, who to be making sure they have the right projects, the right visibility. Because even if you're talking about compensation and getting promoted, you have to have access to the right projects and the right forums to be able to get it. And that's what I see, right? When a lot of conversation, a lot of research shows that it's the access to opportunities that actually provides a challenge. It's not that there's no dearth of capability or being able to do it. Okay, there's some part of the confidence that we may all struggle with, the imposter syndrome and stuff. But leaving all that aside, if you give access and provided them saying, I'm giving you access because I know you can definitely do such an amazing job, that already means they're going to do, because they already stretch themselves so much, especially women of color. There's so much that they're going to give. So you have to be able to give them that and provide that space for them to show up and do that work.
Yes, absolutely. It's about providing that space and providing those opportunities for people who don't even know that those opportunities exist, or who may see a room full of opportunities and they do know that the opportunities exist, but they need someone on that sponsorship level to be able to help them to access it. And I just think the more we're having these conversations about people willing to be sponsors and sponsoring other individuals in the organization, the more doors of opportunity that are going to open up for more women, for more people of color to be able to advance and not just get to the management level, but get to higher level leadership and then executive positions.
Absolutely. Executive positions. And I think board positions, there's a lot of conversation. I interviewed Julie Abrams Castro, and she talks about women in board positions, right? Because you've got the power and you've got the money. Now you have to wield the influence and the power to create space for yourself. But for the others who come behind you, is really about owning it and executing on it, not just having it. So how do you move that boundary forward? Because we all have to do it that way. That's the only way we're going to be able to move faster rather than waiting for an organization to drive culture change. It goes back to that original discussion, right? What can we as individuals do while we're waiting for massive ships to steer themselves? But you can captain the ship yourself and steer it a little bit. So
Yes. And you can captain that ship. You can, what I like to say is being on the offense in terms of your career and your professional development plan. And it's great when people tap you for opportunities, or it's great when your leader comes to you and says, hey, I have this opportunity that I want you to consider. But how are you being in the offensive seat in terms of truly taking control, having a vision for your life, having a vision for your career, knowing where you want to be 2 years. I think we used to talk about planning 5 years and 10 years down the road. And that's probably a little bit more challenging now, but just having a really clear vision about where you want to be, and then what's going to be your plan to help you get there, whether it's additional experiences, whether it's additional skills and capabilities that you need to figure out how to gain, but what are those things that you need to get you from here to there, and what's going to be your plan to help you get there?
Very true. This conversation, I think there's no end to it. I would love to spend a lot more time, but I know you have an event to get to as well. So this is a question I ask every guest. What is the advice you would give your 21-year-old self?
Oh my goodness. The advice that I would give my 21-year-old self, I would say that, first of all, be willing to take risks. Be willing to take calculated risks and go out there and try something. And every single thing you're not going to win at, every single thing is not going to be a success, but take those calculated risks in your life and in your career. One of the things that I wish I had done was had more international experiences, whether it was internships or even spending some time in another culture and another country earlier in my life, because I just find that people who have those broad experiences and they just know so much about what's going on in the world, it just really shapes and it colors how they think and who they are. So I wish that when I was earlier in my life and earlier in my career, I would have had that courage to step out of the box and do that. I would say something else is having more of that courage to express myself more authentically. And regardless of the environments and regardless of the organizations, knowing and understanding what that looked like for me and how I could be comfortable doing that and still being able to have the career trajectory that I did. Then I would say, lastly, investing more time in building relationships. And I think for me personally, just knowing the value of having true, solid relationships with people around in different departments in the organization, around the country, around the world. And I just don't think I put a lot of value on that earlier in my life. Yes, going to college and you have friends from college and you have friends from graduate school, but really, what can you do early in your life to truly set yourself up your entire life around investing in true, solid, authentic relationships? Because everything that we do is around people. And so your ability to be able to connect and engage with people and build really solid, long-lasting relationships are just so important. And I feel like for me, I didn't really understand or really put any credence around the value of relationships until much later in my career and then much later in life. And I feel I do nothing but spend a lot of time trying to connect and engage with people. And I wish I had done that my 21-year-old self.
So much gold nuggets in what you just said. So for people who are listening, I think what we're trying to say is, between Lenetra's conversation on her 21-year-old self and everything else, is show up as yourself, look at the organization around you and see what that right fit is. That's how I look at it. You have to mesh the two together. Educate people around you as they show up so that they understand your lived experience so you can move forward. Be intentional about finding your sponsors, showing the value you bring to the organization, what you differentiate yourself, and articulating what your own goalposts are and where you want to go so that they can advocate for you. And I think you were very clearly nuanced it between what is sponsor, what is advocate, and what is mentored. And especially for people and leaders, allies, and organization, I think they have to understand the distinction, especially for women and women of color, is that we need sponsors, not just mentors. Mentors, we have plenty. We need those people speaking to us, speaking for us, giving us the opportunities to grow. And taking calculated risks, I think, is very important. And building, we talk about networking as a very sort of fluffy activity very often.
Yeah.
But it's about building strength around that network so that people you can work together to move forward. One last question. What is the one word you would use to describe yourself?
I've been thinking about my one word, and I would say the one word is relentless. For me, it's just having that tenacity to go after things. And even when I'm told no, even when things fail, even when, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. It's just being relentless in the pursuit of achieving my dreams and being bold in coming up with what those dreams are. And my dreams and my path now is much, much different than what I trained for in terms of my career. But it's just being relentless in going after the things that I want to go after to create the life that I want to live, not just for me and my immediate family, but also future generations of my family. And in order for me to achieve those things, I have to be relentless. I have to be tenacious. I have to persevere. And I just have to go after it with gusto and just don't give up no matter what. Because if I give up today, then I'll be sitting in the same chair this time next year wondering, why did I do that? And now I got to start over again. So that's the word that I would say to describe myself is relentless.
Amazing, because you're obviously a lifelong learner as well. So it's going to get you to move forward. You don't want to stay in one spot like that.
Right.
So how can people find your book and connect with you on your social platforms?
Yeah, so people can find my book on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and put in the book title, Unwritten Insights, it'll pop up. So it'll be released February 1st. And it's in both soft cover format as well as digital format. I can also be reached via my book website, which is www.unwritteninsights.com. Then I can also be reached on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is a social media platform that I need to spend a lot more time on. So definitely connect with me on LinkedIn or via my company website. And my company website is www.watchmeexcel.com. So my company website, my book website, or LinkedIn are the best ways to reach out to me.
So if you're listening and you have more questions for Lenetra, or if you have questions on her book, want to share what you learned from it, or looking for even coaching, you can reach out to her. Thank you so much for spending time today. This was a very on point, important conversation that we needed to have. And I hope a lot of people take away information that impacts them, but for allies and organizations also to see what they can do to support folks around them. So thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for inviting me, and Happy New Year. It was so good to see you again.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Tune in every other Wednesday to catch the next episode. If you think a friend may benefit from this, please share this podcast with them. Please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. I would love to hear from you about your stories and your journey. You can reach me on my blog, Twitter, Instagram, or Gmail at Women, Career and Life. Until next time, this is Sirisha signing off. Remember, there are infinite possibilities to drive change in career and life. Which will you choose to make a reality today?